Order. Welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. We've got a very interesting, but it's the last session of our inquiry into the health impacts of breast implants and other cosmetic procedures. And on our first panel today, I am delighted, and I know that it's a very busy week for you both, given it's British Beauty Week. Is Victoria Brownlee, MBE, Chief Policy and Sustainability Officer at the British Beauty Council, and Leslie Blair, MBE, Chief Executive and Chair of the British Association of Beauty Therapy and Cosmetology. Wow, that's a mouthful and a long title. I'm glad we didn't put your title underneath your name. Welcome to you both. Before we start, if there is anything that you think you want to answer in more fully or with data that you think would be useful for us to see, please don't feel that you have to cram it into the answer. You can always follow it up in an email afterwards, okay? Thank you very, very much. Kirith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for your time today. I want to start with the consultation on non-surgical cosmetic procedures. The original one took place in October 2023. The government's now said further consultation is needed. What's stopping the government from getting on with it, and what are the risks of further delay? I'll go to you first, Leslie, if that's all right.
I think I can maybe answer the risks of us not going ahead with it, because I think that's really, really important. That we've got increased pressure on the NHS for the more botched procedures and that things go wrong. You know, the NHS has already got enough on its shoulders, on its plate, etc. And what's happening with the lack of regulation presently is that people are presenting themselves at A&E when they're having a complication to one of the treatments that is not adequately managed by the injector, the therapist, or the practitioner. So that's definitely a big one. We have people working below the radar, which I think Victoria and I, being in organisations that we are very, very much into standards and fit for purpose qualifications, it's very, very frustrating, because we do have people out there operating and they are putting profit over standards, which is really, really scary. We have poor hygiene standards, so that is a risk to consumer and public safety, because we've not got that monitoring, and a lot of people that don't hold the correct qualifications are in it for the money and in it for profit, so that they are not probably practising to the levels that they should be. We have misdiagnosis and poor judgment, because unfortunately, again, people are putting profit before what the standards and what treatments it should be. So that's huge. Lack of accountability is a huge one. In our industry, because we are not overseen with any regulation, we are not accountable for anything that goes wrong. And I think that that's really, really important. And it definitely does make you think a bit harder when you're doing things. If you've got that accountability, that if you don't do it correctly, not only have you got your ethics, but there's a chance you're not going to be able to practice going forward. There's the unethical marketing, that people are sending out claims that are just absolutely preposterous and mostly untrue. We have body dysmorphia, that people are really working on that, and that is really, really bad, especially with all the problems with social media and how the kind of ladies, gentlemen are meant to look now in the eyes of social media. We have the high profile cases are really harming the kind of view of the public of our sector, and it's a sector that I'm very proud of. I've been in for over 35 years as a practicing therapist, so standards are very, very important to me. We have black market treatments. People are buying all of these things from overseas. We don't know what's in them. You hear of like high levels of rat poison and different things and different injectables, etc. So that's definitely very, very apparent out there. We have no oversight on the devices. There is oversight there, but it's very easily accessible because it's not monitored that we can buy these things.
So the risks around delay are just that the current exists will continue, but also increase, basically.
You don't mind me cutting in. It's kind of created this policy vacuum that we're really grateful to the government for the work that it's done to date, and the fact that we had this announcement over the summer about them moving forward with these red procedures, and I don't know whether to go over the red, amber, green, but there's kind of lesser risk green, medium risk amber, should really be a surgical procedure or a medical practitioner only red treatment. And the government's commitment to move ahead with that red is hugely welcome, and something that Leslie and I have been pushing for many, many years. But the level of issue and areas of times when things go wrong is generally in the amber category, and that's where we're really waiting for regulation, some kind of licensing scheme for that area. And until we have that, we're going to continue to see problems where we have this policy vacuum where more and more unregulated qualifications are made, people offering short courses saying that they're going to be government compliant when we don't actually know what the government is going to require of people. So it's just created a system where we know that the government is moving forward with something, but because there's that lack of clear timeline, people are kind of jumping on the bandwagon of creating things to say, oh, don't worry, because this is going to be absolutely fine for the regulation when it comes in, when we just don't know that that's the case.
And do you have an idea of what might be holding the government back from actually moving ahead?
I think there's a complexity around what the qualifications and training standards should be. And there's going to be a period where people that are already qualified have to undergo some kind of assessment to check that they still meet the new criteria of what the new level of training qualification standard will be in the future. That will be difficult. I completely understand that. And the training of environmental health and training standards officers that will ultimately be enforcing it. Both of those things will take time, but the government has essentially got an open door here. We have environmental health officers, we have the industry, and we have medical practitioners and the NHS all saying, go for it. We want a licence, we want regulation in this space. So they're pushing an open door. So for us, it's a case of, let's go. We're all here to kind of help give you the expertise that you may need to go forward in those bits that maybe are slightly trickier areas. But we just need that timeline so that the industry can prepare itself.
I think as well from a cost perspective, maybe the government perhaps is thinking, can we fund it? It'd be very much self-funded if we have a pay licensing scheme. So we would believe that would be self-funding and it would be easily managed with the licence fee.
And just around licensing, does the proposed tiered licensing system adequately reflect the risks associated with the different non-surgical cosmetic procedures? And do you think it will be effective? And have you had any feedback from members on the proposals, particularly around oversight? Victoria?
I think from our perspective, it needs to be as simple as it possibly can be, understanding the huge breadth of different procedures that will potentially either currently under the proposals be within this, but also future-proofing it for the rate in which the innovation is moving in this space. I mean, when we think back to when the original consultation took place, and that's when things like vitamin infusion injections were really kicking off. Now it's weight loss injections and various other modalities and new innovation that we just didn't even know about a couple of years ago. So goodness knows where we'll be in a couple of years. That part of it is really tricky, but I think we need to get to a point where we're equipping the enforcers with everything that they need in order to do it. And for us, that categorisation is really important. So for us, RED, CQC will be regulating and ultimately monitoring that. That's medical practitioners only. They're already overseeing those people anyway, so it's just additional kind of activity that they'll be doing in respect of people that they're already on their watch list. And then that amber section, that's where it does get a little bit more tricky, because we agree that there needs to be a level of oversight here. And I should probably caveat this by saying we as the council, and I know Babtec are the same, have in our consultation responses said that we also believe injectables should be under red categorisation as well. But we're mindful of the fact that the government are unlikely to do that they're likely to keep it in the amber category. But for us, there's a huge range in what we think the level of supervision should be in the amber space, and that will be difficult for enforcers. But for me, what a level of supervision might be required for an injectable and for someone administering a prescription-only medication, for example, and what could perhaps go wrong and with that, and people having to give special antidotes and things that are prescription-only, to something that's much, much lower level, and Leslie can speak to this much better than I can, should require very different levels of supervision.
Yeah, because we've got, obviously, as Victoria just mentioned, the complication management. If you have, to put it basically, if you have an injectable done, if you have a filler, you can have a blockage in the artery if it goes wrong, and then you need a prescription-only medication in order to break that down. So that can be one of the problems. That's why we need somebody that's got the correct credentials to be the overseer to do that. So that's needing a much, much higher level of oversight than, for example, if somebody was to be doing some sort of peel. And that's where we've said, you know, in the beauty industry, we are very, very qualified if you're sitting at a level 4 in order to apply peels, to do skin needling, etc. But there's different levels of deepness and the results that you're going to get from them. So a beauty therapist doing it up to level 4 to a certain level is fine. There shouldn't really be any oversight needed. When we're going a bit more ablative and deeper into the tissue, then that is needing a bit more oversight. So it's just managing these parameters and knowing which is what, and also that the overseer has got the correct credentials. Because I think what we don't want to be doing is just opening up the gates to medical practitioners thinking, great, we can oversee all of these different modalities, when they've not got the correct qualifications. At the moment, you can go and do a half-day peel training, skin needling training. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean to say you can do skin needling or peels. You know, our training is a lot longer than that. So what we would ask is that, if at all possible, that everyone was having that even playing field. We've got parity across the board, that the medic and the beauty therapist and the beauty professionals are doing it to the same level. And let's all do what we are able to do and stick in, you know, our kind of lane, I think is a really good one.
Yeah. And when we say level 4, that's the qualification. Just to caveat that, just in case.
And I just wanted to ask as well, do you think the government's correct to restrict the highest risk procedures, so for example liquid BBLs, to suitably qualified health workers, or do you think there should be a total ban?
Well, you'll be lucky to find a medical practitioner that would do a BBL, to be honest. The majority that I speak to, the opinion across the board for more respected practitioners is that they wouldn't do that under any circumstance because of the risk. Right. And that's ultimately what it's about. It's about a medical practitioner understanding those risks and putting the client safety first. Yeah. And I think for something like a BBL, I think you'll be lucky to find a UK-based practitioner that will be willing to do it.
So by putting it in that red category, making it surgical only, we're probably fixing the issue by doing that, because as Victoria rightly says, we're probably not going to have medics actually wanting to perform these legitimate.
Yeah, so in effect, it's basically a ban without actually banning it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karin. Victoria, I just wanted to come to your point about actually the biggest kind of complications and issues could fall into the amber category. And as you rightly said, in the last 10 years, on our high streets, online, everything, the beauty industry has kind of revolutionised. The technological advances have been great, and they are so fast. Yeah. The minute that something comes out on the market, actually it's old within 2 months. It's been superseded by something else. How do you envisage a licensing scheme like this to be able to keep up with the pace of change and scale of innovation within the beauty industry?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question. I think we're going to need it's going to have to be within the wording of the regulation as it comes through, that there's constant review of this. I think we're quite covered within the wording under Section 180 of the Health and Social Care Act, that the types of procedures that will be covered under the licence are broad, so it gives us that freedom kind of in those areas, or at laser and light and heat and all those kinds of things. But it is a problem area. I think what we have to do is just, as I said, make sure that there is that constant review and oversight with the correct people in the room, and that's both environmental health and ultimately the enforcers, talking about what they're seeing on the ground. That's the industry talking about new technologies and making sure that they're linked to occupational standards and training and education, and not just kind of some flash in the pan thing that's kind of come out from another country that shouldn't perhaps even be being done in this country.
I think it's keeping the narrative open, and it's not, when we finally get some sort of licensing in place, it's about having regular meetings with industry, with environmental health, as Victoria so rightly said, so that we can manage this kind of innovative industry that we're in. You know, that's what makes it such a wonderful industry, but it also poses its problems as well, because we are so fast moving. You know, with us at BABTAC, with Victoria British Beauty Council, we are probably on the forefront of hearing what's going on, and sometimes I feel as though I'm not keeping up with it either. So it's really, really such a fast-moving industry, but we need to keep it safe. That's the main thing here.
Thank you. And safe in all parts of the UK. So I've come on to devolution. So how do the proposals in England differ from those in Scotland? And is there a potential here with risk with the lack of regulation in Wales and Northern Ireland that could just lead to cross-border issues? We could just get something done in Wales that you couldn't get somewhere else, or you could get your hands on something that isn't licensed in England, that is just completely unlicensed somewhere else. Should additional steps be taken to deal with these cross-border issues? Yeah,
I think so. I think we were chatting about this earlier, and I think when we had the COVID situation, when Scotland, we kept the masks on for some reason a lot longer than everyone else, and all that was happening was people were going across the border to get treatments. Really? And it just happened. We had lots of therapists going underground, just a lot of the time to make a living as well. So I think that there needs to be parity across the 4 nations in order for us to make this work, or we are just going to get this kind of grey waters in here and the muddy waters. I think at the moment as well, just now in Wales, you need a licence to pierce ears, but you don't in England. So if people have got salons or businesses in both, they just do it in the one that's not. So already, and that's something that is relatively straightforward and not a massive safety issue. So yes, I think we would absolutely want it to be cross-border to have parity.
Okay, thank you very much. Samantha.
Thank you. Just coming on to, I've heard you touched on it already, but training, qualifications and oversight. So how should the government define and enforce minimum training and qualification standards for practitioners that are performing non-surgical cosmetic procedures? So maybe should there be, I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, but should there be a national curriculum or central accreditation body for aesthetic training maybe? And how can you ensure consistency across
Okay, so we've got national occupational standards that the industry all work together towards, and that is, I think the terminology out there, and this is something that I bang on about all the time, it's using the correct terminology, and I think that we, from a number of years ago, we make sure that when we're speaking, when we talk about a qualification, that is something that is fit for purpose, it's on the regulatory framework, it's governed by somebody, the likes of Ofqual, which is a government regulator. So we wouldn't call somebody going on a one-day course a qualification. That's a training course. A qualification is something that is robust on the register, and that gives the difference of getting people thinking of the difference between both of them. The national occupational standards are there, and if you have got a regulated qualification, that will work to the national occupational standards. So that would be a benchmark of standards out there for what training should be and fit for purpose training. So we've already got that, and we're constantly developing that. And that is put together, they are reviewed very, very regularly as well. But at the moment, because we don't have any licensing, that you need to have the qualifications in order to practice the procedures and the treatments, that's where a lot of the problem is as well, because I could go and do, and I did all my qualifications, you could go and do none but advertise yourself as a practitioner. Still get insured, which is a total other minefield out there, and that's where we've got this disparity out there. I always say all that glitters is not gold, that when you see a certificate on the wall, it doesn't mean to say that it's a fit for purpose qualification, but unfortunately consumers do not realise that, so it's the consumer awareness, all of this too.
So on that point, actually, then again, it might be putting words in your mouth, but is there an argument to say that actually government should consider pre-existing experience? So if you get accreditation, it's accreditation almost gold standard if you've got...
Yeah, I think though that gives us a benchmark, so it's an easily judgeable benchmark, and I think that we've got that all in place, so it would definitely be prudent to use that as the standard, because then how do you judge other standards? And I think that should be the absolute very minimum that we're looking for here. But again, even playing field, that's all that we're asking for throughout, that we have got an even playing field, because there's just so many different variables out there. And if everyone was just working to the same standard, people have maybe been a practitioner for 20 years. That doesn't mean to say they're good, but also doesn't mean to say they're bad. So it's about putting in process that they have got an easy pathway in order to gain that qualification, to make them fit for purpose, to reach the standards in order for them to practice and reach a licence. And that's what we would be advocating. We're not saying you need to, after practicing for many years, go back to square one and start training again. We would imagine some sort of oversight from awarding bodies, from regulatory bodies, bodies, that somebody can go in, be assessed, see where the gaps are, fill the gaps, let them do a practical assessment, which is very, very important. Theoretical assessment, if they do that, then they're good to go because they've reached that standard that has been viewed across the industry as a minimum standard we should be working to. And then insurance companies should only insure this standard too, which is not happening.
And that's
I just wanted to bring Victoria in.
I was just going to say, and that's so essential from an enforcement perspective as well, unless you have a really clear level for which the enforcers are going and checking. So it has to be a central database, in our opinion, of practitioners that have a licence, and within that they have had training from a central database of listed providers that are doing a government-mandated qualification. So we essentially get rid of this issue where we have people offering, as Leslie mentioned, these kind of short 2-day, sometimes often only virtual courses. They're not actually having to do any practical assessments, and then they're going and doing, Prosecco, Botox parties in people's living rooms.
Better than the ones that are doing it on YouTube, to be fair, though.
Yes.
That's a step up.
So would it help if there was just only regulated healthcare professionals? So if regulated healthcare professionals was like an only requirement needed to perform or oversee non-surgical procedures in the amber category?
Not to necessarily perform. I think in the red category, absolutely healthcare practitioners only.
Surgical.
Sorry,
surgical.
But as Leslie mentioned, there is a correct pathway for non-medical practitioners to be able to go and get a degree level qualification, but just not with the 70 grams worth of university debt that you might have to get to go through university. And I think we need to always bear that in mind, that there has to be safety, but also accessibility for people that are, I mean, in our industry, we're over 80% female-led industry, and they are working mothers doing this in and around other responsibilities in their life, and we've always championed the fact that we are able to offer these things to women, and that's fantastic. But they have to do that in a safe way that meets a minimum standard that Leslie so rightly pointed out earlier. So it shouldn't be that you can only get these qualifications if you're prepared to go to university. There has to be an apprenticeship route, a level 1, 2, 3, 4 route that you can work your skills up, but it should just be through the proper training methods rather than a 2-day course.
Thank you, Samantha. I just wanted to ask a question about the promotion of some of these procedures, but you mentioned people doing it on YouTube, Prosecco and Botox parties, and quite often it's influencer-led, but they're advertising something. Do you think tech companies should take more responsibility for what is promoted on their sites and the adverts that they allow onto their sites in this area? Victoria?
I would love that. I mean, technically that should already exist currently. The problem that we have is that ultimately it's a case of having vigilant people who are willing to report these things, and then they are inevitably taken down. But it's kind of the wrong way around. It's after the fact, and therefore the damage has already been done. If that person's got a following of 20, 30,000 people, then essentially the problem's already happened there. But we experience this Love Island effect, essentially, of these kinds of treatments being much, much more accessible to what I think a decade ago would have only been celebrities or people with very significant levels of income. It created, by seeing these kinds of people that had these kinds of procedures on television, a situation where more people wanted these kinds of treatments, and so it was kind of a race to the bottom of more and more practitioners filling a void of need from people, and a race to the bottom of cost and price. So that's where you had these short courses and others coming up saying, well, you could go through a levels 1 to 7, which will take you 4 years, well, how many years?
3 years probably.
And lots and lots of time and some cost to you, or you can go through a much, much shorter route, and no one's going to ask you the difference. And we find this all the time. How many times do you actually go to a practitioner and say, can I just check your certification or whatever? You usually go because a friend's recommended it to you or something.
Nobody's
like that.
ever in my whole career asked me to see my certificates
Really?
in the time. And, when I spoke to clients, because I was practicing at the time, we did various surveys, and they just said, I just took it that you were qualified. And I think even the use of the word, I kind of alluded to earlier, the use of the word qualified is very, very widely used, and not always in the correct way as well.
And not just in the beauty industry, I'll say.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's even the kind of protected terms of the word qualification, of levels, because we get so many people, because we also do insurance for the beauty industry, and we get so many people coming with a qualification that they think is fit for purpose because it says level 4, level 5 on the certificate. And we check every single certificate and we check against, if it's not something that's on our kind of landscape, we do investigation into it because we do not insure you unless you have a regulated qualification. And the amount of times that it comes up that it's been a day or 2 course, but they've been given a certificate that says level on it and they've thought they've got a qualification.
Could have stopped there because we're just checking whether we were going to have votes. Apparently no votes. Yeah, I was just a bit worried the bell was about to go.
Okay.
It seems we've escaped.
Fine.
There's nothing. No, we're fine. In which case, I'm going to hand over to Rachel.
Thank you. Victoria, I think Leslie's quite clearly sort of told us about some of the problems with the public not understanding the certificates and not asking, not knowing what to ask for. What measures do you think are necessary to improve public awareness of the risks associated with certain procedures and how to choose safe providers?
Oh, to me, it goes hand in hand with anything that we do in the licensing scheme. So, yes, absolutely, the license needs to be self-funded, but there needs to be a portion of that money that's put towards education in this space as well. And part of the licensing scheme should always be that there's a cooling off period and that the practitioner has gone through alternatives and what the potential side effects could be, the things that may go right, the things that may go wrong, and given the person that's looking to have these treatment the time to make that decision. It should never be you go and have a consultation and you can have the treatment straight away. There should always be that cooling off period. And I think a lot of the time the public aren't really aware of that.
Yeah.
But if we can create this licensing scheme where all of these things are a mandatory element of the license, then to me it becomes normality for the consumer that they come to expect that. But it has to go hand in hand with that public education campaign of what to do if things go wrong, what you should be looking for in a practitioner. I mean, Leslie has a fantastic campaign, the Time campaign, which they've run for many years now, which we support. But ultimately, the consumer, I think, still needs much more education across the board, government-led and industry-led, to really hit those messages home.
Yeah, can I jump in there because as Victoria has just said, we've got our Time campaign which we launched at House of Commons. We've also this year just launched it at Scottish Government, and that's a campaign to get people talking and to get the consumer talking, to make people comfortable and equip them of how to ask the question of, okay, so where did you train? How long did you train for? Oh, you're insured. Where do you buy your products? All of these things are very, very important for safety for the consumer. So we've done that. It's been very, very successful. We've done massive reach. I think our total, I'll just read from here, total campaign reach, 361 million. Our PR company came back to us and told us. And we've been on over 100 media coverage, pieces of...
Thanks, Leslie. Can I stop you there because we need to try and get some of these details out. Victoria, can I push you a bit? What steps do you think will be required to ensure that unregulated and illegal practitioners are not able to practice once we've got the licensing scheme in place?
Good question. So ultimately, if the practitioner doesn't have the adequate level of qualification, they wouldn't be granted a license. And for me, in the same way as with the Botox and filler regulation for under 18s that came in 2021, it should be ultimately that it's an offence to then continue to operate by offering those services, and then therefore there's the legal side of that.
So there needs to be some regulatory framework around that.
Around essentially a breach
sanctions.
of a license. If you're choosing to operate without, in the US they have that you have to have a license to be able to offer any essential kind of beauty aesthetics trade services in order to be able to practice, and if not, then there's fines, potential prison time, etc.
You see that being enforced through local authorities, environmental health officers, or trading standards? How would you see that enforcement?
I think at the moment the environmental health and trading standards are trying to do the best that they can within the regulations that currently exist, and so probably are best equipped to do it because they are seeing what's going on the ground. With the Botox and fillers regulation, that would actually come under police oversight and enforcement. So I guess that there's an element of both, that there would be fines for the level depending on fines, or further action depending on the seriousness of what's gone wrong.
Thank you. And Leslie, I want to talk a little bit about insurance because I know that's something that your organisation covers. So the government stated that appropriate indemnity insurance will be a requirement for licensing. what sort of minimum coverage should be required to protect consumers? And has there been any information obtained about the likely cost of that insurance for providers?
Well, at the moment, there is no requirement to be insured to do these. I think across the industry, the majority of people are insured, if I'm honest. Unfortunately, there is no oversight for insurance companies either. So we've got a lot of situations that people can just be insured when they've not got the fit for purpose qualifications. So I think that what we would really, really want is that was the only way you could get insured, is if you had a licence and if you had qualifications. So I think from a cost perspective, it's definitely very much in correlation with the prices charged. So I wouldn't say that was a big cost to businesses. I think that would just be a cost that is expected by businesses to have to pay. And it's not like for normal insurance for the kind of more basic modalities, it's £99 a year and that includes a full membership, and that's 6 million of indemnity. For the practitioner, we've not had any claims, I think, in the beauty industry in the UK that have ever gone anywhere near £1 million. So I think that the 6 million is there probably just as a kind of...
I mean, I think there's obviously a need for sort of an amount of indemnity insurance per claim, but also a total amount for all claims, isn't there? So are you saying that level should be set at $1 million for a single claim, or 2 million?
Well, it'd be unusual to even get to the £1 million, to be honest. Any claims that we are seeing, because we do not insure the advanced aesthetics, just because we don't have that kind of level of oversight that we can actually kind of adhere to when we're giving out insurance. So for the normal beauty modalities, you're probably talking about maybe 50, 60,000 would be the payout claim. If you were doing for like colonic irrigation, which was a bit more intrusive, I think it was about 250,000. But again, we don't insure that, so I can't comment on it.
So that would be different, I'm guessing, with the licensing scheme, perhaps, Victoria. If you had a sort of, amber and red, there would be different levels of insurance for different...
The doctors are doing it anyway, because they're already covering themselves for their medical procedures that they're doing. So, yeah.
So a medical practitioner would, I'm pretty sure under CQC regulation already, would have to have insurance. Yeah. And as Leslie mentioned, the majority of practitioners already do have insurance. It's just, I'm sure a lot of it isn't fit for purpose. And the problem that we have is that there is for some insurance providers, you don't have to send any proof of qualification, physical qualification. And also the insurance companies, like Leslie mentioned, this could just be a piece of paper that actually means nothing. And how are they to know? Because we don't have a regulated standard of this is what the proper level of training is. The insurance providers, to be fair to them, are working within the constraints of what it is that currently exists.
Quite frightening that insurance would cost £99. I mean, I was involved in law before I became an MP, and our indemnity insurance cost tens of thousands of pounds per annum, as opposed to £99 for, and that was just for financial losses as opposed to a loss of health or potentially
that's
loss
full
of life.
cover they're getting for that as well. They're having the 6 million payout. I think 99% of claims, and because we do it properly, we check to make sure that people are qualified. The problem that we see in other areas is that because they've not quite checked the qualifications when it comes to the time of claim, and they then do present these certificates, they say, oh, no, this is not a qualification, so we can't pay out, and they're not actually covered. So that can be a problem as well.
That's helpful.
Thank you, Rachel. I've got David and then Rosie for some supplementary questions on this section, please.
Yeah,
David.
Thank you, Chair. I think this one's probably for you, Victoria. If a practitioner is perhaps under investigation for malpractice or for some sort of failure, what restrictions are currently applicable to that practitioner during that period, and perhaps what restrictions should be applicable to that practitioner during that period of investigation?
I can't speak to medical practitioners, so I wouldn't I wouldn't profess to have knowledge in that space. Leslie, you may know differently. But from a non-medic side, this is the problem that we have currently. So at the moment, if you were to have a botulinum toxin, so an injectable in your face, something was to go wrong and you were to want to seek recourse for that. So you'd want to have that practitioner stop, you'd want to claim some level of insurance through having to have some kind of follow-up procedure to fix it, or something like that. There's nothing in place currently that can stop that person from operating. So a local authority can't get involved unless there is a level where someone has caused grievous bodily harm or something like that, and you can utilise kind of funny pieces of regulation. But there's nothing in place now that can actually stop that person from operating. So we see cases all of the time where people are contacting us saying, there is a person that has given me some kind of injectable treatment. I know I've written to them, they have blocked me on this and this and this platform so that I can't talk to people about the level of service that they give. And they are still the next day giving 10, 20 treatments to other people and going on so. There's literally nothing we can do about it. And that's absolutely why we need to be bringing in regulation in this space, because the environmental health officers' hands are essentially tied. We've had cases where even when the environmental health officers have been able to utilise kind of strange bits of regulation to kind of stop people from operating in certain local authorities, they just move to the next local authority. And you have to rely on the fact you've got as diligent and astute environmental health officers that are going to go through all of those rigmarole rings and hoops again with the resource, very limited resource, to do it again, to them to hop onto another area. And we just can't continue in that way.
Thank you, David.
How would you prevent that from happening?
How would I prevent it from happening? Well, ultimately, the regulation would mean that if somebody was if an issue was raised to the local authority officers or the trading standards officers would be able to go and do an assessment and check what's going on there. And if they feel that there's something has gone wrong and that the person isn't following the standards that is required within the licence, and they could be stopped from being able to practice. But it would, I think, depend on what it is that the evidence that's come through and what we can see has happened. But I agree with you. Those are the kinds of areas where we need kind of further clarification on what levers we can pull on with government and regulation as it currently stands, and what we need to do more, and which parties would need to be available for each part of that.
Potentially a national register of restricted practitioners as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I've said this cross-border parity is so important.
Yeah. Thank you. Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. When we first started this inquiry, I kind of got completely hooked on the Olivia Attwood series on ITV. I thought it was so excellent, a bit squeamish making. But I was really surprised as an old lady who's got children in their 20s that so many really young women who don't need anything were just going for more and more treatment, spending tens of thousands of pounds. You're talking about the risks. None of them seem to be in any way aware of the risks. Do you think we as MPs or the government has a role in educating or targeting specifically younger people? Because obviously they're trying to keep up, like you mentioned, with influencers and stuff. Do we have a role in how we could educate them a bit more?
I think yes is the short answer. We could all be doing much more on that. The problem that we have with influencers and seeing things and wanting to emulate that, as young people we were all guilty of, pushing the boundaries. And I think there's an element of the accessibility of our industry now means that people can potentially do things to themselves that they weren't able to do several years ago. At the same time, a practitioner that has anything good about them should be talking that person through whether or not they feel that that is necessary, the other options that are available to them, and really giving them all of the information that is a responsible practitioner would do to move them into other areas should they wish to do that. But ultimately, it's autonomy. So it's if you're giving people all of the information, they then have the autonomy to make that decision rightly or wrongly, and then have the consequences of that. As long as they're doing that in a safe environment and they're given all of the information, I think that they should be allowed to do that, because people should be able to look how they want to look. That's not for us to say what's right or wrong. But I think as long as it's being done safely with all of the information available to them, given to them, then that's for them.
And maybe if we share more of the risks that are out there, because I don't think they understand. I've got great pictures on my phone that I show to young girls that go and get lip filler done of lips that have totally dissolved, and I show them what it's like. And a few of them have now not went to get it done. And I think something like that is just just educate people on what can go wrong. You know, one of the side effects or possible complications of lip filler is blindness because of where it can migrate to the eye. Do they probably know that? Probably not. So I think probably campaigns with that. And that's something that I know, Victoria, we would be very, very much wanting to get involved in and support if we possibly could. But I think social media is just crazy. How do we change that? I think my other favourite saying is emptying the ocean with a thimble, because has it gone too far with social media and just the reach that this all has, etc. And this is the way people think that they should look. And that's their idea of beauty. And if you speak to other people, and I think as oldies, talk about me, I'm much older, but you know, my idea of beauty is very, very different from somebody who is in their teens who thinks that having enhanced lips, having botulinum toxin, having fillers, etc. You know, I wouldn't say that's the most attractive thing, but it seems to be in this generation that it very much is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. You're right, beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
And it is, that's why I asked the question around tech companies, because it used to be that we were influenced by the people around us, and now we are influenced by everybody all the time. And I did read recently that there was a 29-year-old woman who had a facelift. These were the preserve of, as you said, Victoria, the celebrities and people much older. And that is obviously carried out by somebody who is a medical practitioner.
Sometimes
so
not always, though. That's the problem with that as well, that's happening without medical, surgical.
Thank you. I'm just going to hand back over to David around monitoring and evaluation. And I think our ministerial team has come, and we'll ask you a closing question, both of you. What would you raise with the Minister? Just one point.
Okay, thank you. So what systems should be implemented to monitor adverse outcomes from non-surgical cosmetic procedures and particular products? And how do you think the government should ensure continuous evaluation of the licensing scheme's effectiveness in improving patient safety? So perhaps a quick comment from each of you. So Victoria,
you've covered that earlier, what you said. Yeah.
I think the central database is absolutely essential for recording adverse incidents, issues where we know that certain things are coming in from overseas and that we see a proliferation of things happening in the UK as a result of those things being imported. That needs to be held on a central database. In order for us to have all of the information that we need to deal with that correctly, it has to be held centrally. And the problem that we have within the non-medical side of the industry at the moment is that there is no central database, there's no centrally held data. It's very, very difficult to understand the length and breadth of this issue, and that unfortunately has led to this issue kind of kicking the can down the road for the number of years we had. We were talking earlier that the Keogh report came out in 2013, first bringing this issue to light, and here we are now in 2025 still having conversations today.
And Leslie, maybe you can answer this. Are there any examples of best practice in regulation of non-surgical procedures internationally that lawmakers here in the UK could perhaps seek to replicate?
I'm not particularly aware of them, but what I would say is that we just need to get the standards of training and education right. I think if we're looking to do it, making sure that it's fit for purpose training and making sure it is the correct practitioners who are qualified to deliver each level of the treatment. So if you are doing injecting, then you are able to manage the complication if something goes wrong. It should be full circle. If we're going to be doing oversight, make sure that the person that is overseeing has got the skill and the qualification to do the modality or the treatment, not just oversee it as well. And I think that's going to be really, really important. And I think that that's where we can make it, and we can absolutely showcase the UK out there as being the best, so that people start talking about us, saying who is the gold standard, who's the best practice. Let's have other countries talking about us. That would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I skipped over Kirith, and I'm very sorry for that, Kirith.
I guess I'll come to you, Victoria. How do you think the government could mitigate undue financial impacts of the introduction of a licensing system on small business owners? And do you think that local authorities and the CQC currently have the resources and the expertise to oversee this licensing system?
Two very good questions. So the adequate resources, I think that there is a concern within local authorities about them being given the adequate resources to deal with this. And if we think about the Botox and fillers for under 18s regulation that came in, I think the wide view with that is that it's not adequately enforced as is currently, and we can say the same for things like regulation on tanning beds and age restrictions on that. The difference with the licence will be because it's funded through the licence fee, that I think it will be easier, and hopefully the local authority enforcement will be better equipped to actually deal with the enforcement because of the funds that they will gather from that. Can you just repeat the first half of the question, sorry?
Yeah, how do you think the government could mitigate undue financial impacts of the introduction of the licensing system on small business owners?
And I think what's important to remember here is the only thing we're talking about restricting is those dangerous, high-risk red procedures, which in our opinion should not be being performed by non-medical practitioners anyway. And we're here because we're putting public safety first. If you are going through the correct formal qualification route, there should be a plethora of treatments and procedures that you can offer. We are not taking away your livelihood. There are still hundreds and hundreds of other procedures and treatments that you can perform safely. It is not appropriate for you to be offering, frankly, surgical level procedures if you are not a medically trained practitioner.
Yeah, agree.
Thank you so much, Karis. Yes, the Minister is sat behind you. If you could ask her one question, or if you have one concern that you would raise with her, what would it be, Victoria?
It would be to move forward with the licensing element, the amber level procedures that would require a license within this, well, prior to the next general election. We really need movement in that space.
Okay, and Leslie.
Yeah, and I think just to make sure that there's parity and to make sure that it's fair as well, that not just because that you are a medic that you should be able to do all of the treatments. I think that everyone to be very much qualified in what they're doing and all keeping interspace of our kind of technical expertise. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Victoria, Leslie. I'm really grateful, and the committee is very grateful for your experience and your expertise and your candour today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you can swap out the panels, that would be great. Thank you. And you're welcome to stay and listen.
Yes, I need
to the answer.
Thank you so much.
And enjoy the rest of British Beauty Week. On H. At the end of H.
I'll just put that new, that's okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Minister. We have Minister of State for Health at the Department of Health and Social Care, Minister Karin Smith with us, and we have Gavin Lana, the Director for Workforce at Department of Health and Social Care, and Professor Aidan Fowler, National Director of Patient Safety at the NHS England and Deputy Chief Medical Officer at the Department of Health and Social Care. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you, Minister. I'm going to hand over to David first, but before I do, you heard those two concerns or questions, particularly from Victoria, around the speed at which we need to be able to bring the licensing scheme into effect, particularly with the innovation that happens within the beauty sector. What kind of timelines are we looking for a licensing scheme?
Yes, straight in, absolutely. First of all, can I say, Chair, thank you for inviting us. This is a really big announcement that we made in August, and I know it's been widely welcomed, and there's a lot of questions to ask. It is complex, as I know your committee has explored, and we're very pleased to be able to come today to share some of that, but also to hear from you and get those questions so that we can get this right, because this is a really important industry. And patient safety is also really important, and as I think you understand, and we want to make sure everyone else understands, it is really complex. So on the timing, and as you've heard from your previous speakers, there's sort of two parts to this, aren't there? There's the let's call them high-risk procedures that will be subject to the Care Quality Commission regulations. We do want to bring forward this as soon as possible, and hold me to a date, but what we're looking to do is consult on those early in the new year, realistically. We are, that does depend on us all getting aligned as to what we're consulting on. I think we'll talk about the red amber green list as we go through this afternoon, and the other complexities, they will then be subject to parliamentary process, and as parliamentarians you will appreciate that that is way above my pay grade in terms of the timing and the scheduling, etc. But this is important to get right. So consulting in early in the new year is something that I can share with the committee on that. Alongside that is the local authority licensing scheme. Again, I know some of you have previously served in local government. You will also understand that it's a diverse sector. There's a range of practitioners, there's a range of procedures, there's the education and training, insurance requirement, premises, the fees, working with local authorities to make sure that they are able to do this, absolutely working in partnership with them. So that work will be going alongside. That will take time for more detailed consideration. So I can't really give we're happy to come back to the committee and to others. We do want to make sure we bring people with us on that to make sure that we are protecting the public and striking that right balance between supporting this predominantly female-run industry and making sure it's safe.
Thank you. And it is a very female-dominated inquiry in the fact of the people that work in it, but also the people that seek these procedures. It's still at 96% of the people that seek these procedures are women. With that in mind, around patient safety, and obviously we understand, and I think we have heard that this will be a big change when it comes forward. But is there more priority or perhaps urgency being given to some of the highest risks? Like we heard from Sasha about her liquid Brazilian butt lift and the horrors that she experienced, getting sepsis, being in a coma, that the person that did that to her is still operating on the high street, essentially. Is there not... why is there a need to consult on something that is that high risk? Should we not be seeing an immediate ban on some of the most dangerous procedures, as Victoria had said, that wouldn't be carried out actually by a medical practitioner? Could we move on some of the highest risk procedures perhaps quicker?
Absolutely understand where the question's coming from and the horrors that we've seen, including deaths and the need to, and perhaps we'll come on to this, educate the public about some of these risks. But we do need to get this right in terms of, I'm happy to bring in Aidan on some of the sort of technicalities about what you ban and what you don't ban and what that means clinically. But I think it's a big step actually announcing the fact that we're going to move into this area. That's a result of consultation under the last government. I applaud them for doing that, but we were very determined to act. It's actually quite a big step for a government to take, and it's great that it's been welcomed so much, but we do need to get that right. So I think getting that right for the early new year. I understand behind that question is also what about in the meantime, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to highlight those risks to the public so that they are warned with that information and don't seek some of these procedures.
Thank you. I'll hand over to David now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was really helpful. Thank you for coming today, Minister. What recompense will consumers have under the new proposals if procedures are botched?
Well, we need to get to a state of being very clear what procedures we're talking about at different times. So with the high risk areas, once we get through that, then they would be subject to the usual procedures about something goes wrong. Because I'm struggling a little bit what's behind that question in terms of recompense. I mean, it's a clinical procedure at that senior level, at that high risk level, then when we hope that wouldn't go wrong, but they would be subject to if a medic was outside their practice or CQC regulation. Yeah. Does that...
Has any thought maybe been given to the non-surgical cosmetic procedures and how that could look in terms of potential recompense when they go wrong for clients? So this sort of the amber level.
Part of the thing we're looking at in the scheme is what requirements we put around practitioners who are licensed about the insurance that they take up, so that if action is taken against them subsequently, they've got the insurance cover that will cover recompense for those kind of procedures. So it's ensuring there's a degree of indemnity cover in there so that there is a route for those licensed procedures. to have that vehicle.
Okay, and we hear, we've just heard from the last panel about practitioners who are perhaps under investigation for malpractice, and the fact that there are currently no restrictions on them being able to continue to practice during that investigation, and even post that investigation, if they've been found to have had any sort of failures, they can perhaps move across local authorities and start working elsewhere. So how would the department perhaps look to address some of those issues with non-surgical cosmetic procedure practitioners?
I don't know if that...
I mean, I would only be able to speak to the medical side on that, and I recognise the concern, and for us, from the medical point of view, it's what happens with practitioners. For example, we see practitioners who are under investigation whilst working in the NHS, who leave the NHS and go and work privately. We have organisations which, under investigation, are dissolved and then they set up under a different name. And I think that is a challenge in regulation, both by GMC and by CQC. And having spent some time recently at CQC, saw exactly that, of the frustration of enforcement where characters or organisations move in that way. And the reality is it is just plain difficult, but it is something that with any of the increase in regulation, we would want to consider making sure that any loopholes we're looking at spotting and addressing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Minister, we've again heard that perhaps there's not alignment across devolved administrations on this, and there's some concern that, you know, if we have particular procedures in place in England, that somebody could avoid them by going to Scotland or Wales, or so how would you ensure there's regulatory alignment across the devolved nations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important point, and it's been really helpful, particularly officials working very close with colleagues in Scotland in advance of us making the announcement back in August. And I think that Gavin might want to say a bit more about this, but that's been really helpful to share that and to work well together on that. Clearly, health is devolved, and so all departments actually, and I think this government is very much committed to working with all devolved partners. The Prime Minister made that very clear when coming into office last July. That is fairly usual practice for us to work well at official level and to make those regulations work across. Many regulations do work well already across the nations, but did you want to add anything to that?
We are working closely with Scottish colleagues on this, not just on making sure there's kind of complementary regimes, but there's also some quite complicated sort of internal single market in the UK issues about whether people can move across, which both Scottish officials and English officials and lawyers are kind of going to have to wrestle with as we develop the regime. So
that will also be true of the products, some of the products themselves, subject to what we are becoming more accustomed to with regard to our role outside the European Union and the need to work across an internal market in the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. A quick one from Rachel, and then I'll be coming to Samantha.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for attending today. I just wanted to come back on one thing about the timescale, because I think this committee has heard some really horrific evidence of what's happened to people who've been given liquid BBLs. And it's just really a question, and it is a direct question, how long are we going to have to wait before they are taken off the high street? Isn't the evidence sufficient to say that that could be done more quickly, whereas I appreciate the need for the longer timescale on consultation with the licensing scheme and the parliamentary schedule, but really how long are we going to have to wait until those dangerous procedures are taken off our high street so that we can protect our constituents?
I mean, I can't add anything to what I've already said on that, that we are, working at pace to make sure that we get this right, and that we intend to have that out so that people can be clear what that looks like in the meantime, I think we all need to make sure that we do as much. And this has raised a lot of publicity around a lot of this, which is really helpful, and we will continue to do that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to.
I think there is a mix of things happening when we talk about, for example, the Brazilian butt lift. There are different approaches to doing that, and there is a difference between somebody who's practicing, say, autologous fat transfer, which they should not be doing, and already are therefore outside what is legal. People who use a product, for example, a filler that's licensed for use in 10 ml volumes, and they use a whole pile of them, which is outside license and therefore already outside regulatory acceptance, and so on. And I know we discussed before when I was here this concern that we have to take a proportionate approach and not drive people into the hands of criminals or abroad as an alternative to get this. So I think the Minister's quite right to say we just need to be a little bit cautious that the adverse effect of what we all want, which is greater regulation, doesn't mean people go to unregulated practice more frequently, which would be a very big concern for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We understand the need for consultation. I do think that the speed is of the essence in some of this, obviously, and I know that the department will work as quickly as it can do. The Minister, you've said that it's on all of us to kind of educate and to keep spreading the word, and I think we all are. But I was just wondering if the Department of Health is running a public awareness campaign, or is considering running a public awareness campaign between now and the time that hopefully we see these really dangerous procedures come off the high street.
Yes, we are. Part of that was in the summer, and actually someone has to do this on the media. The response on the media, the interest, and I commend some fantastic, largely women, younger journalists have really taken this on because they can see what's happening in their own social media feeds, etc. And they have pursued some stories on behalf of particularly those young women. So we continue to do that, and we're in partnership working with TikTok and influencers to get that message out. I think we are trying different innovative ways of trying to get that message across to particularly highlight the dangers, the need for people to inform themselves, to ask those particular questions. There's information as well online on the NHS website, which I think is really good, and directing people to that information and using as many channels as we can to get that information out. So I think there is good information available. If there are other ideas that the committee or elsewhere thinks that we should be in different sorts of channels, but that's the approach that we've taken.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Samantha.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming along today. I'd like to talk about training and standards. And I wonder what minimum training standards the government plans to introduce for non-surgical aesthetic sector, and how would they be implemented?
I mean, this is it is really pivotal to the whole area of regulation, this, and I think you probably heard from your practitioners for the range of current training and standards out there, and as a consumer, how difficult that is to navigate. So when we're looking at this, we will have to consider, and this is part of what will take some time in this, the current education and training standards, the systems, who's providing those standards, what good practice looks like. And I think, again, you've heard this is an evolving industry. I mean, almost weekly there are new things coming out for training people. So it's a dynamic area to keep on top of. And then how we work to establish something that's very robust education standards to get this across the sector. So that is something that you know officials are used to doing. But in this area, I think, and maybe something Gavin wants to come in on, because of the nature of both the product and the qualifications and the sorts of work, getting that right will be a huge area of this work. Do you want to add to that?
I think it's an issue we're paying close attention to is whether for existing high quality practitioners who are well trained in non-regulated environments where people have done the right thing in reputable providers, how you arrange this in a way that new standards you consider recognise those previously acquired skills in a kind of pragmatic way, whilst maintaining the standards that you want to see. So I think, and because of the complexity of the numbers of procedures and the different providers, just getting that right is going to take us a little while. But we want to work closely with the industry and in doing that to get it pitched at the right level.
And I think we should say, sorry to interrupt you, Ms Nibbler, but there are a lot of good people doing good work out there. And working with them, and some of you've heard from them, I mean, they want good standards because they don't want their industry to have this bad reputation. They want that, so they want high standards, and they don't want to be in competition with, you know, people who are, you know, cowboys, low standards, low hygiene. So working with them, with their expertise to try and get that right is also critically important.
That's really good to hear, actually, because I think one of the things that we've been hearing is that many skilled practitioners, including those with level 7, so, you know, like master's level aesthetic qualifications, could be forced out of practice if they lack a formal medical background. So what plans does the department have to create accessible upskilling or transition pathways for such practitioners? You sort of alluded to it, Gavin, but I just wonder whether there's a sort of plan already.
If I take first, then I'm going to bring the experts in. And this adds to the complexity of the timeline about whether someone is medically qualified and then what for and what those procedures are, and they are defined very closely because this is as it is, of course, in usual medical regulations. And then, as Gavin said, in terms of what's already out there, and then what we know is coming upstream, and that is part of the severe complexity, and encouraging people into what is a growth industry and some good jobs for people. So getting that balance right between that patient safety, that clinical expertise, that training expertise, and that safety is exactly why some of this takes a long time. It's very complex. Do you want to?
Yeah, and forgive me sucking lozenges, it's better than coughing. But it's a whole spectrum. There is a continuous spectrum of activity, so what we have to do is find a way to chunk that up in a sensible way of what is non-medical and how are you trained in that, what is medical low risk, and you know that's a difficult term because we've seen the effects of botulism in people recently, so I would argue that's not low risk in some ways, and making sure that when we define medical practitioner, we're clear what that means. There are some surgical procedures that should not be open to all medical practitioners, and we're clear on that. But equally, we don't want to get to the point, and you will have heard from plastic surgeons who, for example, say you need cosmetic surgery training specifically to do a breast implant, whereas if you had a breast surgeon here, they would say, we are very clearly trained in oncoplastics and we are very familiar with putting in breast implants and reconstructing after cancer surgery, and so we wouldn't want to exclude those, or maxillofacial surgeons who do cosmetic surgery to treat lesions on the face, for example. So it's just getting that bit right. But I agree, you would not want a breast implant to be done by a general practitioner who has not had surgical training, so we just need to get that bit right.
We'll be coming on to breast implants a bit later on. Samantha.
And just finally, this is a really key point, because I think we've heard that 80% of practitioners are women. Lots of them will be female entrepreneurs with their own business. So I just wonder if the government's considering providing financial support or funding to assist practitioners in meeting any new regulatory requirements that may be expected of them.
And I think we'll need to work with the industry, and we do recognise that, and we say that in all our comms and messaging, that is a largely female industry, largely for women, and that's an important part of our economy, particularly in local communities and our constituencies, and they do want to work with us, so we do recognise that. I mean, obviously many of them are already working at a high level and are training and paying for training and premises and hygiene and so on, so they are already doing that. And I think you heard from your last panel, that sort of transitional period, we'll need to keep talking with them about how that works. I mean, all these systems are based on licensing and fees, so ultimately become self-funding as a system, but that will obviously need to be part of our discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I mean, clearly a licensing scheme can't come soon enough, but has the department undertaken an assessment on the economic impact of the proposals on practitioners, particularly those operating small and independent businesses? And what steps are the government taking to mitigate financial harm or unintended job losses in the sector, particularly because many of our high streets are occupied by a lot of these businesses?
Yes, which is why, as I responded to Ms Niblett, that we absolutely do recognise how important many of these businesses are. So we will have to, balance that transition period coming forward. I mean, many of these industries, as I said, are already paying for training their staff, and are in, well-maintained premises. And so they want to, as I said earlier, they want to make sure that they're not competing with people who are operating not as well as they are. But we recognise that will need to be part of the discussion as we build up the licensing system.
Thank you.
And we will need to do formal business impact assessments as part of the development as well, to kind of take a formal look at that at each stage.
And have you carried out an assessment as to the additional resources that will be required by local authorities and the Care Quality Commission to administer and enforce the licensing scheme? Because I think it's clear that single businesses could be subject to many different parts of the licensing regime, which could become complicated.
I mean, those are absolutely parts of the discussion, and that is why we can't, do something today. That is why we want to be realistic with the committee and the public and the industry and local authorities, and talk closely with them about how this comes. Clearly, we're in conversation with them all, and CQC and local authorities and practitioners in advance of the announcement, and that's we recognised it was welcome, and are continuing to do so. But that's why essentially we think that consulting on the high-end aspects of this, the higher risk procedures in the new year is a realistic timetable to have something robust enough to progress on. And in parallel with that, we're having these conversations with those people for exactly these reasons.
How do you think you'll be able to prevent the new regime from being just too confusing, too expensive, or too bureaucratic to be effective, either for the businesses themselves or for the public confidence?
Again, that is the challenge that we are talking to people about right now, and it's really helpful to, I think, to have that aired, and if I may say so, for the committee to raise that and to we recognise that it is really challenging. It is like the proverbial onion, isn't it? You take away one part because of as I said, the nature of the procedures and the dynamic environment that we're working in, how it's evolved so quickly and grown up so quickly, what a growth industry it is. And how important it is to our local economy and training and jobs and opportunity and the demand from consumers. So that's why we did decide to act in August, and it is that complexity that means we want to put a realistic timetable about it. We want to work as quickly as possible, but we do have to get it right. And it also has to be, and I think you've heard this from others, it also has to be flexible enough to cope with what else is coming, because we don't know all of these procedures, etc., that are coming. So we want to make sure that we keep up with this. And I thought, as I was in the room, a parting comment, I think it was from Leslie, that we want the UK, as we want the UK to be a good beacon of growth and good governance and good regulation. But as the Chancellor said, regulation is also part of our growth agenda. So we want to get that exactly right. And it's a really good test case of how we can do that.
Thank you. I want to just drill down on some of the qualifications as well, if I may. Several stakeholders have sort of made representations to us, including the Royal College of Surgeons, who've highlighted the need for stricter regulation on who can perform surgical cosmetic procedures. Is the government prepared to require medical practitioners, which we don't yet have a full definition in this field, so is the government prepared to require that those carrying out the procedures hold a recognised cosmetic surgery board certification?
I'm going to come to Aidan. First of all,
it's a very technical
the
question.
College, yes, indeed. So saw the college's submission, and obviously we want to work closely with them, and we welcome their cooperation with working with this, and I totally understand where they are coming from on this. And in fact, in August, when I announced this from Southmead Hospital in Bristol, it was the surgeons that were just delighted to have us talking, because they obviously see some of the worst effects of this. So I know they are also very exercised about this. But there are lots of demands on surgical time that we as a government also have. But it is, if I pass over to Aidan on some of the...
So I think it links back to my earlier point about who's carrying out cosmetic procedures and for what purposes, and what I wouldn't want to see excluded because they don't have that qualification by nature but do have experience is those people carrying out reconstruction after cancer surgery, for example, or trauma surgery, which is arguably cosmetic. So it may be, in essence, the same sort of procedure after skin surgery on your face or after breast reconstruction surgery, after cancer surgery. And those surgeons are highly trained through a scheme which is specific to their area of practice, but isn't labelled cosmetic surgery as such. So we would be putting an additional burden potentially on those who are already doing it. So we just need to be careful of that bit.
But you would be prepared to say that surgical procedures must be carried out by surgeons?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really mind who answers this, but we've heard evidence highlighting the importance of more robust informed consent processes. Is the department reviewing existed consent protocols for cosmetic procedures?
I mean, yes, obviously this is a really important part of this work, and I think there is information available again on the NHS website for people who are contemplating this, that people should have all the relevant information about what the treatment involves, the benefits and the risks, and where there are reasonable alternative treatments. Do you want to go through how that works currently, or was that...
It would be really useful if this is quite detailed, for it to be sent to us in writing, I think might be the best way.
What might be helpful, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is there is very extensive, I have it here, guidance on consent, which is about informed consent about procedures, cooling off periods, etc., but also recognising where mental health capacity may be an issue and so on, issued by both the Royal College of Surgeons, in this case in England I have here, but also the General Medical Council. It's pretty extensive, and perhaps if we appended you those two, that would be useful.
That would be useful, thank you.
Thank you. And will the government mandate cooling off periods between consultation and surgery, which is something the last panel were really keen on?
Those are already recommended best practice. And I think it's not unreasonable to... I mean, my concern with mandatory is always the exclusions to it. So if somebody requires urgent surgery, I wouldn't want that to be excluded. You know, somebody who needs urgent surgery and wants a reconstruction to be excluded because they can't have a 2-week period, for example. But taking that into account, I think it's already best practice to have a 2-week cooling off period. It would be a matter for government whether they felt that it was appropriate to make that mandatory.
Mr. Do you want to?
I mean, I think this is to be advised about how operationally this works for people. As I said, the advice is there on the NHS website and more detailed in those other guidance documents. And I think we do need to be guided by what works ordinarily, and sometimes that's not known to people. Why do most of us who aren't involved in practicing medicine, for example, know the detail of that? So I think we need to share that as part of this entire process so that people understand what that means. We can't do enough of informing people that, you know, all surgery carries a degree of risk, and that people do need to spend time considering those risks and understanding those risks and feeling empowered to do that and to do their research, and you know, part of that cooling off period is part of that general advice. So we'd be guided by the experts really on the operational reality of that.
And I hope you saw a letter that I wrote after the last attendance here about the number of hits we had on information that's already available. And very notably, a huge number of people choosing who will do your cosmetic surgery, as well as other sites on whether it's the right procedure and so on. So that is available.
Thank you. We've heard evidence on the need for more thorough psychological screening, which is what you just talked about, Professor Fowler, of certain individuals seeking cosmetic procedure, particularly in relation to mental health conditions, such as body dysmorphic disorder. And I talked earlier about very young women going in for these procedures, and they don't need them in you know, the cosmetic ones, not the medical ones. Is this an area that the department is currently examining?
Well, I can't speak for the department, but certainly it's an area which is absolutely front and centre of advice on consent for cosmetic procedures, and it's something that we maintain concern about. And actually there is a spectrum of mental health disease with body dysmorphic syndrome, if you like, at one end of it, which people should be aware of, and there are clear pathways for referral into the system for treatment, which is often cognitive, the talking therapies, cognitive behavioural therapy and so on, which is available widely, and we're making sure that where possible those pathways are as straightforward as possible, and that all the advice includes looking out for that concern and making sure people are referred if it is felt that is an issue.
I mean, more widely, it's not just a department issue, is it? It's working, particularly, I think you were alluding to young people, with our colleagues across Department of Education, and recognise, and we are working closely with colleagues there around mental health support into schools and so on. So the advertising I referred to earlier, the linking with influencers, I think that is an important role cross government to get that right. Our colleagues in DSIT, the Online Safety Act, all of those, I think we do need to line up to recognise. And I know the committee's taken great interest in that body image issue, particularly. So, as Aidan says, in terms of practitioners recognising who's coming to them, that's part of that good practice. But more widely, I think your comment refers to something that is cross-government in terms of being very clear to people.
Thank you, Rosie. Minister, you said we should be all encouraging people to look into the risks and do their proper research. But I think what we've seen is this kind of strive for perfection, the Love Island face and body, and people don't just want it, they want it now. And I am pleased that you're working with social media sites like TikTok to try and get the message out there, but they are also some of the most problematic areas for pushing these trends. You can get 60-second reels where somebody has a hugely dramatic change to their face. There isn't any risk talked about. There isn't any reality about the downtime. Sometimes it will be, here's somebody with some filler, and almost immediately there's the result. Actually not being honest that this is probably a week later or something like that. Is the department working with the Advertising Standards Agency and other regulators to strengthen oversight of advertising for both surgical and non-surgical procedures? And what are you doing cross-departmentally to hold social media providers to account for some of the legal but harmful content on their site around surgical procedures and non-surgical procedures?
We are obviously, I mean, I can't speak directly on that sphere. I'm afraid it's beyond my particular purview. The department will continue to make sure we work with all of those, the Advertising Standards Agency, to make sure that they know what we're doing, and that will be obviously important. And as I think I said earlier, the link across DSIT, Department of Education, in order to get this right in terms of content, the Online Safety Act and so on, lining that up, I mean, is important to the government. In terms of this specific work, I guess would be advised differently, but in terms of as we develop it, we'd need to make sure that's part of the development of the regulations and procedures, that it is in line with all of those bodies.
So we've had Ofcom in here before to talk about non-consensual intimate image abuse and some of the new powers that they'll get. They've always talked about how they want to encourage the online space to do better before they actually take enforcement action. Is there any conversation ongoing with social media sites in particular as to their responsibilities in terms of advertising correctly and honestly the risks of these procedures?
In terms of the Department of Health and Social Security, unless I'm advised otherwise, I'd need to come back to you on that what the specific relationship is, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Karin.
Thank you. What impact do you think correcting complications from cosmetic procedures is having on the NHS? And does the NHS plan to begin recording instances where they have helped patients who've suffered complications from cosmetic surgery and procedures from both the UK and abroad? I might come to you first, Aidan, for that.
That's fine. It's an area, and I think we discussed this again before, where we don't currently code. So we would code complications from cosmetic surgery potentially, but not where it was done. And it may not always be clear where it's done. And I think where we are with this is thinking about why we would collect this information and what value it would add, because we're going to be asking people to increase the burden of work. So essentially we're saying to busy clinicians, please record extra data about what's gone on, and we do it with this purpose. So I'd want to explain to them the purpose, which is, as a result of it, what can we do about it? Because it has to be useful information, and just saying, well, look, this proportion have been abroad, and we know that there are significant numbers of people going abroad. We know the numbers broadly of people seeking cosmetic surgery abroad, and they are worryingly high. And it's then, what do you do about it? Because it is very difficult to intervene in a way that is useful. So you'd be recording data and at risk of, if you like, admiring the problem and creating the moral distress of knowing how many people have gone abroad for surgery and had complications, but not actually being able to act on that information. So it's making sure we collect data in a purposeful way, which we can then do something about, which I think is more complicated. But we do know anecdotally that it is a problem. People say, I am seeing people on a weekly basis who've had cosmetic surgery abroad with complications. And as I said to you, I get this at home because my wife's a breast surgeon, and she sees these cases and would say our clinic is seeing people every week who've sought cosmetic surgery abroad. But it's, what do you then do if you collect that information rather than just general information about what we're seeing, which we do anyway.
Yeah, and do you know if the NHS is exploring how to recoup costs of these corrective procedures? Is that something that's being done?
We're not, because we know it's a very difficult thing to do, and of course you get into a whole debate of, so if you have cosmetic surgery abroad and you have problems with it, we recoup costs, whereas if you injure yourself abroad skiing and we deal with the complications, we don't recoup costs. So I think there's a judgment on that, and also not wanting to prevent people from stepping forward with potentially dangerous infections because of the risk of costs. So I think we'd have to be very cautious about, one, how difficult it is and the administrative burden and the cost of recouping it, but also the effect on people who we need to seek support because they have been harmed potentially and are at risk, and not wanting to put them off doing so.
Yeah, and Minister, what is the government doing to try and increase public awareness of some of the risks associated with cosmetic procedures being done abroad?
So, and on that point, part of the wider work, I mean, absolutely agree with as Aidan's identified, but part of the wider work will look at, if we can find out how much that costs in terms of how much and how large scale it is, rather than on anecdote, and see whether we can build that into routine data sets, and we'll do that as part of the continuing work. But again, I come back to, and I think the work of this committee now and the announcement is doing that, is to highlight to people, and it is quite astonishing how many people have stopped me in these corridors or elsewhere about what they are seeing when they go on holiday or come abroad, about this and how risky it is, and the need to check it, to be informed, to ask those questions, to provide information to people so that it doesn't go wrong, and that we just raise the standard, really.
Thank you, Karin. Samantha.
Just moving on to breast implants, PIP implants in particular, do you think it was the correct decision for the UK to only remove ruptured PIP implants but not replace them, despite other countries such as France opting to replace all PIP implants?
Shall I take that one? So look, this was a decision made some time ago, as you know, and there was a review of that at the time under the leadership of Sir Bruce Keogh, who was the then medical director of the NHS. And they looked very extensively at data, and there was different response across the world, but the data clearly did say, and there was European data as well, it wasn't just our data, saying that they had not identified sufficient risk to merit removal of all these implants. The other bit that I think is important that doesn't always come through, but MHRA, if they were here, would point out, is that PIP was a company that manufactured breast implants in a variety of ways over time, not all of which, firstly, had the thin capsules that were more likely to rupture, and not all of which had non-medical grade silicone in. So you would be removing some implants, and it varied by lot number, and it wasn't always clear which were which. You would have been removing some implants actually which were perfectly safe, as well as ones where there is a concern of rupture, but not a concern of an increase in toxicity or cancer risk and so on. So the view was, and it's stated in the European data which I have here, that there is not sufficient evidence of risk to merit the potential risks of removing all these implants. The decision about making removal available, and I should always reiterate the point that if people have a PIP implant, and there will be people out there who still have them, and they may be absolutely fine with no problems at all, if they have any concerns, they can present either to the original person who implanted or to the NHS if that's not available to them for a review, and they should have annual reviews. That was the advice of the thing, to review it. But a decision was made at the time that if people had concerns, we would offer removal, but not replacement, which was a decision made at the time. I wasn't part of it, about cost and, so on.
On that topic of, as a woman with breasts, not had hip implants, I must say, but the very thought of thinking there's something in my body doing me harm, I'm going to now have maybe one, both removed, and be left with what would be there as a stonking reminder of an absence of breasts, or leave me disfigured. How because we can't afford to get them replaced, how is that an okay decision? I know we always look at cost and the bottom line, but how that would then have wider impacts on a woman?
Well, I think it was a historical decision made at the time based on the evidence available, and to point out that there was an increased risk of rupture of some of these implants, and overall there was an increased risk of rupture, which is usually apparent to people, on which basis they would be removed. There wasn't an increased risk of other harms, so that's an important point, which there wasn't an excess risk of cancer risk, for example, with these implants. And the decision was made at the time that they would remove, not replace. I wasn't part of that decision.
It sounds like you're talking about physical harms, whereas I can't even begin to imagine what that would do to a woman's mental health. Sorry.
Yeah, before you come on to your next part of your question, I really want to dig down onto what Samantha's point is, and it's a really important point, because you're talking about the risk as if it is something almost external. If we were to replace this conversation about some faulty breast implants, some not, with, say, something like a car, and a maker or model of a car, some had some faulty seat belts. You might need the seat belt if you have an accident, you might not. That entire make and model of car would be recalled. Yeah. But yet this was a different decision made inside a woman's body, and other countries took a much more proactive stance. And I think as a committee, we're trying to understand why it was that women's bodies were an acceptable risk on this case. And I understand this was before your time, and it may be something that you need to write back to us about. But it does go to the heart of Samantha's question now, I think.
I think there are two separate issues. One is, was it right not to remove all of these implants? And on best available evidence, we felt it was, and that it wasn't necessary to remove them all. I'm aware France did, others did not, and there were mixed models across the world, including, for example, Australia. And the second point is, if you remove an implant, should you replace it at a cost to the NHS? And that's a judgment of where you would then take that cost from, and what it would mean we couldn't provide on the NHS as a result of spending money in that way. And that judgment was made at the time, and I guess the only other thing is to say, well, is there sufficient merit to review that decision at this point, where very many of those implants will have been removed or replaced. They may have been removed and replaced privately and so on. So that would be a judgment for the wider system as to how to prioritise spend.
How would we press for that in light of the fact that when there is a need for other corrective surgery for botched cosmetic procedures, that happens? So I like the tone of maybe we should revisit this, but how do we then ensure that it is revisited? It just feels like a woman's carrying all this risk. She has something done that she thought she was safe. Later finds out it's not because it was done privately. It shouldn't be replaced on the NHS. Meanwhile, she has got this potentially ticking time bomb inside her body. So how would the committee press the NHS to review this decision?
I don't think it would be something to do lightly, not least because we're also talking about cosmetic tourism and not wanting to encourage it. And I suppose sending the message that if there's any problem at all, don't worry because we'll sort it for you isn't the right message perhaps to be sending. So I think it's something you would have to give very careful thought to. And again, it would have to be something balanced against other priorities which are very significant. There is a lot of pressure on spend within the NHS and we have to use that money as wisely as possible. It is difficult to know at this stage how many of these implants, firstly, are still in and where people would want replacement of them and exactly how much of an issue therefore that is to merit the input into it. So, and I cannot tell you the answer, no one can tell you the answer to how many, firstly, implants remain and secondly, how many people would want those replaced at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. In shocking news, we're running roughly on time. But I think this question is probably fitting because it's where we started our inquiry, and that is about breast implant illness and some of the associated risks and the need for greater research about the safety of breast implants in general, and the concerns over breast implant illness that many women have raised. Does the government intend to make the breast implant registry mandatory? Because with the PIP incident, as Professor Aidan Fowler just said, there wasn't a knowledge as to which ones were faulty, which ones didn't hold medical grade silicone within them, and actually we need better understanding about some of the implants that are being put into women's bodies to know which ones are safe and which ones are not. Minister?
Unless Aidan can tell me differently, I like the use of the word mandatory there. I'm not sure what you come forward on that. I mean, I think we are in a different world. Partly this is an MHRA issue around devices and so on. So
there isn't currently, we were told by a panel of experts, of surgeons, that there isn't currently a register for safe implants that are being currently used. And as a committee, we have been asked whether there would be a registry of safe breast implants to be used.
Right. Let me try and manage what is a complex series, I think, of questions as effectively as possible and stop me if I'm not answering the question. So on breast implant associated illness, there is quite a wide spectrum of symptoms that people present with that can't be attributed to a single illness. So medically we don't recognise the term breast associated illness. However, we also recognise that people do present with a wide variety of symptoms and concerns, and we recognise that we must assess those because some of them have, for example, had a leak from an implant which does need intervention. We know there are associated risks, rarely, of certain specific uncommon cancers, and we need to look for those when people present with illness. And we also know anecdotally that some people who present with very difficult symptoms that may be attributable to all sorts of conditions do improve when their implant is removed, which doesn't necessarily confirm causality. There has been a lot of research looking at this. MHRA continue vigilance of this, but we've had 30 years of using implants, and changes have been made over time to, for example, capsules, smooth versus textured, and what the pros and cons. And it is always a balance of the risk of distorting effects like capsule formation versus the risk of the very, very small risk of sort of 1 in 15,000 of cancers. And so I think there is a wealth of evidence about that, and nothing at the moment that says there are specific, very significant common risks from the implants. As far as registers are concerned, do you want to stop me?
No, go ahead.
There is a breast implant registry that has been increasingly used. We estimate that 80% of implants are going on that. That does not mean that the information about them isn't logged in the site they're put in, but it's a central registry, and the number of implants on that is registered, and we would want all implants to be registered. I think there are some hygiene issues, if that's the right term, about how that registry works to make it simpler, because at the moment feedback is it's really very onerous, and if you're trying to do a list of procedures, it's quite a thing to fill in, and we've got to get the balance right of wanting lots of information whilst also not wanting to make it impractical to enter the information. And I'd want to get that right before we say, right, now it's mandatory, and not risk people then
there is moves to improve that
and
registration.
the direction of travel, absolutely. Yeah. In the world, there's a big program around registries, and that is absolutely the right direction of travel of, you know, using scanning technology to support that and moving to the point where we know exactly what, and I think I made the point before, we don't want to be in a situation where we know more about what we buy in a supermarket than what we put into our other people's bodies.
And when it comes to improving the usage of that registry and the kind of smoothness and the effectiveness of it, and obviously intake of the information going into it, because data obviously is really key to this, are you looking at improving the take-up and the usage of surgeons with that registry as well, and their use of it?
And it is improving all the time, and their use of it's improving. But yes, we are working on that.
Because how much is that improving in terms of
I think
numbers?
The latest figure I have is that we estimate that 80% of implants put in are registered on that, and the number on the registry at the moment is in excess, I think, of 100,000. I can't.
Okay.
It's in here somewhere.
It's in there somewhere. Okay, it'd be really useful, I think, to have that, because you know it's great to see improvements, but 0.1% is still an improvement on nothing. So we need to be clear on that. And the last one, I want to come back to the breast implant illness. When you talked about the mix of symptoms could also be attributed to something else, we have already carried out an inquiry into medical misogyny. Women are told this repeatedly, whether it's the menopause, whether it's PMDD, whether it's any kind of reproductive issues. We are constantly told that our mix of symptoms could be something else. And I think there is a genuine frustration that women are not listened to when it comes to their bodies. And when you have a group of women saying it is my implant that has made me ill, and they feel that they are being ignored, they feel that they're being let down by the health system yet again. What can we do to better improve that relationship, that trust, and that their views are listened to?
And I didn't want to imply that those symptoms were dismissed or weren't important, but it is right that we try and identify a proper cause. I wouldn't want to find us in a situation where we remove a breast implant and find that actually HRT would have been a better option for somebody, or that they have long COVID, or that they have some other condition. So I'm just trying to highlight the difficulty where you do not have a clear set of symptomatology in identifying the correct condition, not just to say, oh, don't worry, it's your age or something like that, and dismiss it. It's to say, can we be as certain as possible that if we remove this implant, in which case we would not replace it, because that would be counterintuitive, that we, as best we can tell, will be reducing your symptoms. And as I say, when people come and they say they are adamant that they think it's related to their implant, whether we can prove that or not, they would be able to have that implant removed, and then we would have to hope that their symptoms improved.
And are you taking and capturing that data so that if there are more women that are coming forward and their symptoms are improving, that would help research perhaps in this area?
Yeah, and I think there has been a lot of research, and I think, you know, and I was thinking through before this, how would you set up research to try and identify that? And I think it's a really difficult area because of how you'd set it up. I mean, let's not get into the technicalities of it, but I think at the moment it would be, I wouldn't be able to say to you, yes, we capture that information in a particular way.
Okay, well, I mean, there may be opportunities to do that and to expand on some of the, when it comes to the breast implant registry as well, if there are issues with particular implants. Would there be a warning system or a flag system on those?
Those registries would log, you know, so the aim of them is that they have follow-up information on. This is in the world of clinical effectiveness and comes from things like, for example, Baroness Cumberledge's report to say we must know when we implant things in the long term, where there are failures of those devices, such as rupture, where there are symptoms attributable to those devices, and record that in a way that is practical for people to do, and they are encouraged to do so, and it is simple for them to do so, so that we get the best data capture we can.
Thank you.
And to add, and it's to my earlier slightly jumping in point about, I think I said, you know, we're in a slightly different place because of Baroness Cumbridge's work and the intervening time. I totally take your point about medical misogyny. And my colleague Baroness Merrim were working on updated women's health strategy. We absolutely, many of us would recognise that, and working actually with professional colleges, professional staff as well, to make sure that women are heard and we do get that right information and the research is in the right place on some of these things. And I think the other thing that it may be helpful for our colleagues at MHRA, who are obviously responsible for picking up many of the things that Aidan is talking around. If you want us to add something on that, we're very happy to do that. They obviously monitor all of that and the implications of those devices, and part of what, as Aidan was outlining, is the need to get them fully tech savvy in the new world, and give them the support that they need to make sure that they can register some of these products, and that we can get the reporting much slicker, because we are working on, have been working in slightly more antiquated systems. I've been to MHRA myself to see the work they do. They do amazing work, but they do that's part of our look at the regulation sector, to modernise it, to make best use of data and technology, so that in the way that we can track so many other things in other parts of life, it is not quite where it needs to be, I think.
We want more data, and we want to use it in real time. I should be sitting here with a laptop on which I can say this is exactly the rate of that. That's the,
that would
that's
be fabulous.
The future. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any follow-up questions? Final questions? No? Then it leaves me to say thank you very much, Minister, Aidan and Gavin. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be writing to you for some follow-up questions just on the data and the details. But thank you very much. That brings this session to a close. Order. Thank you.